English 1 Standard. This is your video lecture for your passage excerpts from the Perils of Obedience. This is your common lit passage. As you can see, is due on April 9th by 11:59 p.m. When you go to common lit, your passage should look like this. And then when you're in your English 1 Canvas page and you are at your module and you go to the nonfiction notes, it'll pull up this PowerPoint and you can scroll down to slide 8 and you will see your lecture notes for this passage. So we're going to jump right on in. For this passage, we are going to continue with the thieves approach. So to begin, we look at the title of the passage. Based on the title, we can infer what the passage will be about. Think to yourself, what do the words peril and obedience mean? If you don't know, you can Google those words and find those definitions to help you understand the title. And then second, there are headings in this passage. So we look at those headings and we find out and we can see that the passage is being broken down into two parts. The first one is the findings of the study, and then the second one is the essence of obedience. So the results, the kind of aftermath of the study and what they found. Next, we look at the introduction. The introduction of the passage introduces a subject, which makes the reader question who the subject is, what are they the subject of, and why. Hooking the reader and getting them to continue reading the passage by creating a point of interest. Moving on, we're able to look at the first sentence of each paragraph. Aside from being able to help give you an idea of what that paragraph is about, we again see that these sentences are giving us contrast and the progression of the experiment the article is discussing. In particular, in this particular passage, they make use of a kind of script format where they have a speaker and then they tell you what they are saying. So be careful that you don't confuse these with the actual paragraphs that we're talking about here. Okay? Next, we have the visual that accompanies this passage. You can see this visual has a caption underneath it, Obedience 1965 by Stanley Milgram. This particular image must be associated with the study that he was conducting. Maybe it's one of the individuals involved. Secondly, the vocab of this passage is largely science-based, again, because of the scientific experiment and the nature of the people who are speaking. Next, we have the end of the passage questions. When you get to your common lit and you go to your assessment questions, a lot of these questions are focusing on process, discovery, results, and purpose. So clearly these are the big ideas and the main takeaways that they want us to understand from reading this passage. And then lastly, we have our summary statement. When an individual is obedient, they feel responsible to a person in authority, but not responsible for the actions they have been asked to perform. Essentially, this is what this study helps us understand. This passage helps us understand. And then lastly, we go to your short answer questions. Question number 7 for your common lit is going to ask, in paragraphs 1 through 70, Stanley Milgram made specific choices to present evidence from his obedience experiments in a certain way. Explain those choices and those effects. So in your response, students should identify that Milgram started by introducing a transcript from a session that showed how he expected every session to go, but then explains how the results of the experiment were the opposite and completely went against what he expected. Make sure that you include that in your response. And then question 8, what details does Milgram use to draw connections between obedience, authority, and responsibility in the section Essence of Obedience? Students should discuss how Milgram describes how obedience takes place when a person's responsibility shifts to an authority figure. And those notes about your short answer questions are right there in your notes as well. Okay? So this is going to be your passage. As a reminder, you have a nonfiction quiz on these particular literary terms on Thursday, April 9th. The quiz will have a 60-minute timer on it, and it will only be open from 7 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, April 9th. Make sure that you get that quiz completed before it closes. We went over some of these terms with our fear passage, and I don't think that we have many more that we can add to our passage for today. So we will just put these on hold until we get to a passage we can continue applying them to them. For your quiz on Thursday, I'm most concerned that you know the term and the definition. Okay? Guys, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.